Councilmember Daughtry, can you hear us?
I love
Yes,
that.
yeah, I can.
Sound check. Okay, cool. We're gonna start here in just a sec.
All right.
Quick meeting tonight. And.
Council President, I'm ready whenever you are.
Excellent. It's 6 o'clock. Let's get started. It is June 20th. Welcome to the City of Lake Stevens City Council Workshop. This is a in-person meeting at the mill and also available hybrid via Zoom. We will call this meeting to order and we will jump directly into our discussion items. Discussion item A, 2023 budget amendment number 2. I'll turn it over to Barb Stevens. Thank you, Council. Let me get that up there. Should have changed over. There we go. Okay, good evening, Council. We're looking at budget amendment number 2. So this is the budget amendment for all funds. As in the past, only the funds listed here are included in the second budget amendment. This information is all in your packet as well, but I wanted to go ahead and give it to you in the update. So there's some slight changes in the general fund and street fund, and then the majority of the rest of them are capital project related. Out of my way here, sorry. So here, this is the summary showing what budget amendment number 2 is doing. It is increasing your revenue resources by 2.1 million and your expenditures by 2.55 million, changing your ending fund balance by almost 400,000. So the revenues, we have the transportation benefit tax for 2023 is estimated at 750,000. Most of the additional increases in revenues are caused by interfund transfers related to the transportation benefit district and other capital projects. So there's a correlating expenditure with that revenue. Capital project increases for the transportation benefit district. I'll show you those few projects. And then those are going to be pre-design engineering for 2023. And then we have the Sunset Beach project and the ADA ramp improvements as well. And as I mentioned, approximately 1.4 million are interfund transfers or have corresponding revenue sources. This is looking at your various operational amendment details. So the operating cost adjustments that previously came to council, as I mentioned, that the last column shows CA or a adjustment. So CA is it's been to council. We've talked about it in council before, or adjustment is generally a newer change. So music in the park contribution that came forward to council a number of months ago. And then the increase in the contract placeholder amount for milfoil. Again, depends on where the contract number comes in. Shannon brought that forward a number of months ago as well. Additional adjustments include the cost to supply our boards and commissions with emails so that they're using their own personal emails for business related subjects, and then reimbursement of a settlement with Cedarwood HOA. We had a title change on that HOA, on that clubhouse property back in 2021. Those utilities and landscape and everything didn't actually get changed over to the city until recently. And so this is us just reimbursing them for those utility and landscape and maintenance fees. We did it in a settlement agreement so that there's no additional future charges coming back to us either. And then the next one is grouped for the admin assistant. You know about this one. We reallocated one of the public works positions to parks. There is an increase in the general fund of 14,600 and a decrease in the other funds of approximately 60,000. So overall, there is a citywide cost savings due to the long-term public works position vacancy. Next, we're looking at the capital projects, the 131st sewer. That's to account for the last minute grant funding opportunity and the related expenditures. We received a Department of Commerce grant for $208,000 and then a curb grant for $50,000. The curb grant does require a $12,500 local city match. And so we have that expenditure in here as well, being budgeted from the remaining pandemic recovery funds. Davies, this is account for the donation contribution from the Row Club for low profile debt and the related expenditure. South Lake Stevens, this is a roll forward of the grant that we received from Snohomish County. just putting in the revenue and the expenditure for that. And then ADA. This will be coming forward for approval, I believe, next week. So total engineering construction estimated at just over $1 million. The current budget includes $400,000. There's $300,000 in the sidewalk fund and $100,000 in REIT, leaving approximately $648,000 needed. The proposed budget includes reallocating the $492,700 that is currently budgeted in pavement preservation and using that for the ADA project, since we won't be doing pavement preservation this year, doing ADA projects. And then the overall increase in the citywide expenditure budget is the remaining is $155,600, and we're proposing adding that from the sidewalk capital project fund itself. And then Sunset, that one is also coming forward next week, I believe. Total project costs about $610,000. The current approved budget includes $257,000 from the REIT 2, leaving $352,000 needed. This proposal includes allocating allowable stormwater mitigation work to the stormwater capital fund, and then the landscaping and to come from tree mitigation, which is actually out of the park mitigation fund. And then the remaining coming from basically increasing the REIT 2 budget by $237,000. And that will be coming forward next week, those contract approvals or bid awards, I believe. Now, this is your transportation benefits program. So all of the transactions listed here account for the revenues, interfund transaction, project expenditures, all related to that, including the recently approved senior civil engineer position, which is the focus most of its time on transportation benefit projects, and then be reimbursed. It's going to reimburse the funds from the Transportation Benefit District Fund. The transportation benefit program adjustment. So this is a lot of information. It's all just counting, getting it in and out of funds. But in summary, it's the adjustments and amendments for 2023 include estimated revenue of $750,000, funding needs for the 4 pre-construction engineered projects totaling $520,000, and then estimated reimbursement of just over $70,000 for wages related to that senior civil engineer. And then the one last thing we have, this just is the update for our organizational chart. It did remove the office assistant from the public works columns, added the park and rec administrative assistant in green under parks, and then added the senior civil engineer under the city engineering department. And that is all I have for your budget amendment. Intended to keep it just to transportation benefit district, but that doesn't happen very often. So there's a few other things in there. Are there any questions I can?
Thank you. I have a couple of pavement preservation questions. So you've indicated that we're taking $492,700 out of that line. And it says no pavement preservation this year due to ADA needs, and those funds are being transferred to the ADA work. Is that, are we not doing pavement preservation because we're using those dollars differently? Or are we not doing pavement preservation because the staff time that would have been used to do that needs to be used for ADA work, or neither, or both?
I can let Aaron answer that, but my understanding is the actual resources, the staffing resources are being put into the ADA, the ADA ramp program over the pavement preservation. The more pavement preservation we do, the more ADA upgrades we have to do. So we need to get the ADA upgrades taken care of and then move into pavement preservation.
That's priority driven, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And then one follow-up question then. I know that we had a presentation, I think at our retreat last winter, perhaps last fall, about the implications of not kind of keeping up on that pavement preservation. Has there been any analysis done to determine, does this increase our pavement costs long-term if we don't do this work this year? Or are we at a place where we can skip a year and still not incur increased costs, or do we know?
Well, good question. So the costs for any construction project increase every year. And so, yeah, we'll have a higher cost for asphalt for a pavement preservation project next year. Barb was correct that it's a resources issue. We're really hyper focused on ADA ramps this year, going to spend a contract amount of between $600,000 and $800,000 on ADA ramps. So we'll be focused on that. The pavement condition index rating for asphalt in the city is around 79 and the target is 80. So the pavement's in pretty good shape. I know you see potholes and things like that out on the roadways, but generally speaking, the pavement condition is pretty good. 1 year is not going to break the program.
Okay, that's
Yeah.
helpful. Thank you
Yeah.
so much. Any further questions? All right, thank
Okay,
you, Barb.
Thank you. I'll bring that back next week on consent as long as nothing changes.
Sounds great. Thank you. Moving on to discussion item B, turn it over to Sarah to provide the playground replacement presentation.
Good evening, council. Talking about playground replacement today, I just put together a slideshow kind of to recap some of the playground stuff already discussed, where we are at, and decisions that have started to be talked about internally at parks. In February 2023, the Parks and Recreation Department had inspected all of the playgrounds, and that is the time when we decided to close immediately 5 playgrounds for safety reasons. Of those, 1 of those was repaired and reopened. 3 of them were removed and no longer exist. And the one Oak Hill is still closed and roped off today. The department is still working with developers at this time. We don't have any public updates, but hope to have those soon and bring them to council as well as the rest of the public. This is our top priority playground to replace, and we are actively working on replacing Oak Hill. The 3 that were removed were Summerhill Estate, Mandolin Court, and Greenwood Village. They're pictured here. 2 of them were very tiny units. The other one was just an aged wooden one and was no longer safe. All of these were considered HOA playgrounds. They were installed at the time the properties and the homes were developed and the HOA formed. They are sitting on city property, as it was an old practice that when these developments occurred, the developer would then transfer open space, storm detention center over to the city. And so we own the property. However, the HOAs installed the playgrounds and they are in charge of the maintenance at this location, including daily landscaping. Just over time, I think as homeowners changed, as HOA presidents changed, as prices increased, and play equipment depreciated, they became unsafe. There is some loose history over the last 10 years where the city would periodically pop in and do some maintenance, like replacing playground bark or replacing some hardware if something was to fall off. And that really came from the request of the citizens who went up to the mayor and then trickled down for the department to go and fix it. But historically, these were not city playgrounds and are not known as city parks. With evaluating these 3 locations, Summerhill Estates, Mandolin Court, and Greenwood Village 1, which was previously called the Reserve 2, our department is recommending that these 3 locations do not become city parks, that they do not receive playgrounds that are installed by the city parks department. With that, HOAs are welcome to contact us if they want to reinstall a playground, and we could talk about details once they're willing to do that, or if they're even willing to put other recreation items on there. From survey data, we saw some ideas like small responses for a fenced dog park, or simply just an open space with some picnic tables, a request for a basketball court, for instance. This is a full grid of all of the playgrounds in the city. This grid came from the park amenities list a long while ago, but it talks about playgrounds specifically. The maintenance column is the one that tells us, is it HOA maintenance or is the city calling this a city playground? And we're actively mowing it and maintaining it today. These are all owned by the city of Lake Stevens. Addresses are approximate. We grabbed a neighbor address if there wasn't one for that specific location. I put the current status just so that we can see which playgrounds are open. As a reminder, the 3 were removed: Greenwood Village, Summerhill Estate, Mandolin Court, and Oak Hill is closed, but all the other ones are currently open that we had inspected. I put life expectancy on here just to remind everybody playgrounds typically don't last forever. Wooden playgrounds last about 15 to 20 years on average. Even your modern playgrounds bought today are expected to only last up to 30 years with proper maintenance. So on here, we have our top newest playgrounds, 4 of them that have 10 years or more. Oak Hill will need a replacement, which we're working on. Several of the HOA playgrounds have less than 5 years expectancy left, and that's with continued maintenance, replacement of parts. We have them on inspection schedules as frequent as every 3 months at this point. Some of them are being visited every month during peak season. For future replacement, in addition to the 3, I'm suggesting we don't replace. There's one other one that can join the list, which would be crossings at Catherine Creek. It's just a really tiny playground that only 1 or 2 toddlers can play on at a time. It's already started to be modified as we had to take off parts that were unsafe. And it's at the end of a cul-de-sac in between 2 houses. So that would be another one we recommend to not replace. We did mark our 4 city playgrounds as permanent replacement. We should always continue to have large playgrounds at those locations. And then we marked the other locations as determine in the future or consider future replacement, meaning when it's time for those to come out, we should revisit the conversation to say, is the HOA interested, or should this become a city park at this time? There are some locations that are larger that could accommodate vehicles parking, where we could bring in a porta potty, for instance, and deem it an official city park and advertise it for other people to come into. But with that, we would then have to take over the landscaping, the trash management. That would be an increase of level of service that the city provides, as well as increasing budget and staff that have to be brought on board. My staff and I sat through and went around the table and just looked at maps after plotting everything out in GIS layers. We identified private playgrounds. We identified playgrounds on schools, churches, as well as HOA and city playgrounds. Those are all color coded on a GIS map right now that we're using internally. It's not available to the public, but it gave us a good understanding of HOA playgrounds that are private are only meant for the households within that HOA. Right? You can't technically drive to it across town to enjoy it. So in looking at maps, we started to say, what should happen to all of them? We put some color coding for the things that I've already announced out loud with what should be replaced, what shouldn't, but I'm just showing you on a map where those are located so that you can have a better understanding. We dropped larger red circles where we thought, hey, in the future, this is a service level that we're seeing doesn't have access to a walkable playground and has high density residential who perhaps should get one. So these are our first thoughts, which we'll later use into building a comprehensive plan. We do have one right now, but our department wants to fully revisit that. So this is the first area. You can see on the smaller map where we're at. We're just going to move around the lake really quick. So out of these, the purple are the 3 that we've said should not be replaced. Right now, this was Summerhill. This one was Mandolin Court. And this one here in the corner is going to be the crossings at Catherine Creek. We do have one remaining here, which we would recommend for the future replacement for the small one. And then we were thinking somewhere in this zone might qualify for another one. Continuing around, this is the reserve area we're often talking about. This is the one at the very end of the cul-de-sac. We said we don't think it's a good location for replacement. It's out of view from the public eye. There's no parking. It's in a storm detention location. It could work well for other types of recreation, but for city parks, we want our playgrounds to be visible. We always want to see if kids are down there and another adult is in the area, if kid gets hurt, any of those types of things. And that is why we didn't recommend that one. Paired with right around the corner, there is a visible location where an HOA playground is. That one would be meeting qualifications for replacing if we decided to take it over as a city park in the future. This one's in the reserve on 10th Street, right around the corner. This one is the location off 4th Street, one of our larger parcels. It also has a basketball court. It is also an HOA playground. And then this one up in the corner is HOA as well. As we move down the side, the current comprehensive plan also 100% agrees with the void in this section. As we acquired county property, there's no public playgrounds in that area. So we dropped a circle in there. And then as you come down the south side of the lake, we start seeing HOA playgrounds as well as a school playground, but no public playgrounds in this location. So we identified a few different zones. Going up the west side of the lake, we do have Cavallero at the bottom, but it is a county park and it is across a major street. Doesn't have great walkability to it, but awesome if you're going to drive to it. So small, medium playgrounds, we identified a few other locations that could receive them. We put a green circle here because this one is already planned and in the works. We have the 20th ball field trails that are being built. And with that, a playground is planned for that location. So we wanted to show that on the map. It's for the trail system that'll be headed north through the power lines. Further north, we have here shown as Frontier Heights. That is a larger playground that serves a large amount of people. We always look for a balance in the Parks and Rec industry of small and large playgrounds. You want kids to be able to walk with their families as well as larger ones where all your friends are going together. So we identified other planned playgrounds. We have Eagle Ridge Park that'll be going in, and then Oak Hill is being replaced. So we put that up in the corner, but identified 2 zones where we just don't have service levels currently with the city. Now, some of these locations, especially as you look at this one just adjacent to the park, there's no land available today. This would be a big feat, a really long plan to get there if we decide to put one in the future, but we just wanted to identify it so that we mark it as somewhere that doesn't have that service level. And that is it. I just wanted to bring this information to you to let you know where our department was in thoughts with playgrounds. We wanted to see if there were any additional thoughts on playgrounds, if you want to continue discussions in creating more city parks, if you want us to contact HOAs to see if they're interested in doing recreation at the locations where playgrounds were removed, or if you'd like to bring this back to future meetings to vote on specific items.
I got a question. So for HOAs, isn't their job to maintain and take care of their open space parks as part of their association dues and so forth?
I would like to say, yes, they have certain things that are in their HOAs. When you look back at the property lots for these and how the parcels were transferred, we're not seeing any kind of agreements where the city said, you have this on our property, here is our outlined agreement. I want to create those for everything that remains. That's the next step for the existing ones and any future ones as well. I don't have access to their HOA agreement internally, but those are documents that can be voted and changed at any time by the HOA as well. So in talking to one HOA, I said, hey, what happened? This playground is a private playground. I can see on Google Street Maps, it used to have a sign that says private playground, and it's now gone. And the HOA told me that they voted to remove the sign, that they really don't have the money. It's very expensive to maintain this stuff. And so they went ahead and removed that sign.
But at the same time, isn't their responsibility to take care of their parks? That's the agreement when they got to put all those homes and the developer put in, they purchased homes. And isn't that responsibility in the city to say, hey, this is part of the agreement. You need to fund this playground in your community. Why wouldn't we hold them to the fire on that?
I think that because the playgrounds were put in by the developer for the HOA, that was what was desired of the HOA at that time. I do believe that if the HOAs want to replace a playground or add other recreation to that area, that would be up to them to vote and fund. The city should not be funding private playgrounds. That's not what we do with taxpayer dollars. The parks that we're going to build and the playgrounds we are going to install, that has to be open to everybody. And those have to be in locations where we can bring the public in.
I understand that. I'm just saying, why aren't we saying, hey, you need to maintain this playground area that you put in? Right? And it's not a simple fact of them saying, well, we don't want to fund it as a community, but that was the agreement they put in place. When they purchased, every one of them purchased a home knowing that they have to fund adequately their HOA. So why can't we say you need to fund adequately park? That was the deal when they purchased it. So why wouldn't we as a city say you need to adequately take care of this? And why would we transfer it to the city to take care of? Why wouldn't we just say you need to take care of this adequately?
It's kind of like the question of how is a playground different, say, from a stormwater treatment facility? Developer, you have to put in a stormwater treatment facility. It's the responsibility of the HOA to maintain that and keep it working and functioning. How is a playground? Just throwing this out, conceptually different. You want to put in a playground, right? You don't want to pay the park impact fee, whatever you want to put in a playground or required as a condition. That playground be put in. I don't know if we are. What we're saying, I mean, oftentimes the condition of a development is that the city has to approve the HOA, the homeowners agreement, and
Correct.
and a condition often of that is that you can't change this, certain things in that without the city's approval, specifically things that deal with say portions of the property like a stormwater detention facility or a playground, and you need to keep those maintained. So, I mean, answering your question, I think there's a way to do that, how we've done it in the past. I guess I'm not sure. I've not.
Well, my thought is
Documents,
this
but
is.
it is something we could look
My-
at.
My thought is this, they want the density and then the city says, hey, you have to have some open space, right, Russ? And you say, we have to have a certain area, you have to have playgrounds because the lot sizes, we let you have smaller. So you need to have a park for these people to go and play in. And then as a group of homeowners get together like, well, we don't want to fund this. But that was the condition in which they bought into it. And then they have dilapidated playgrounds, but they're like, we don't want to fund it. That's not our issue, that's their issue. And why don't we hold their feet to the fire on this is my thought is, why not say, you need to budget correctly to maintain this, just like a storm vault or anything else?
When looking at the plot maps and the conditions and when these were built, we can clearly see where the open spaces, where those tracks are, where they were dedicated to the land, where it says it'll be maintained by HOAs, but it doesn't mention the playground. In fact, a lot of these, we don't have records on when they were built or how they got there, quite frankly. So I think that if that is something that we want to do is hold them to it, the city can easily write a letter to ask them to replace their own playgrounds. That is something we can certainly do. I just don't know, that would be up to Greg is how we make that happen, but we can certainly press the issue.
Well, why wouldn't we, anyone in the last 10 years who've had this agreement or anyone moving forward, why wouldn't we say you have to maintain this park? Right? I mean, it makes sense to me. They want the density and everyone keeps asking for density, but then there's a requirement for them to have a park or spaces. Why aren't we making them take care of these spaces? Why aren't they budgeting accordingly to do this? It makes no sense to me. And then we're like, well, you don't want to do it. Okay, I guess we don't make you do it. Because they don't want to pay an extra $10, $15 a month to have a space, but that's what they agreed to when they purchased their home.
Correct me if I'm wrong, my recollection, I think that's a really important point. And my recollection from when you had the open house was there haven't been the inspections in the past that helped provide the information that led to the decision to close some of the playgrounds. That's sort of new information, and that HOAs don't have certified playground inspectors. And so I know there were a couple of people that spoke that said they had no idea that their playground was failing and assumed it was fine and assumed it would last another 10 or 15 years. So I wonder if some of that is just education to HOAs and maybe offering the services, the inspection services, so that HOAs can be more planful around knowing that there's only a 10 to 15-year life, and knowing that if they're replacing a playground, or we replace a playground, let's say, that we're letting the HOA know you're gonna have to budget to replace this within 10 or 15 years, and we'll come and do, regular inspections. I think that was part of what was lacking, was just HOA's understanding of how long.
Sure.
Playgrounds last.
Every association in condo association is required by state law to have a reserve study done. Some of them choose to not follow their reserve study. Some of them choose to only do parts of the reserve study. But a reserve study is supposed to be done every 1 to 3 years.
Would that include someone who would be able to say, hey, your playground is gonna need to be replaced in X
How long
amount
their
of years?
fences last, how long the roof, for condo associations, how long the roofs, and they're supposed to plan accordingly.
Mhm.
Otherwise, they lose their FHA funding ability. But a lot of them choose not to fund it, is what I'm saying. And my thought is we let these units come in, and this is what people keep talking about. We don't have open space, our kids don't have room and everything, and they come to us and say, we're frustrated with the density. And then when we say, hey, you have a requirement to have a park in your community, like Oak Hill or whatever, we say you have to maintain that park. But then they, as a community, go, well, we don't want to pay that much in dues. And so we want to keep it really, really low. And then they don't fund it adequately, and they don't have the funds to do it. Then they go, well, let's just rip everything out and just have a area where kids can kick a ball. My thought is, why aren't we enforcing what they were supposed to do in the first place? Just like a retention bond or anything else, they were required to put this in as part of a community of 75 homes, a couple open spaces, area for kids to be able to do stuff. But we're not holding their feet to the fire, in my thought. And if we're not, I don't.
So I'm curious, Sarah, and I don't know if this is a question for you or Greg. What would that look like? What would the enforcement mechanism be?
Well, if a condition of the approval of their development was to have a homeowners association that maintained the improvement, right? The city could take code enforcement action against them, against the homeowners association, just like if any other improvement that wasn't being maintained, to seek them to require them to do that if they wouldn't do it voluntarily. But we need to have some commitment to act on. It needs to be, and it usually comes in shape of a condition of approval of the development. So we would have to, so if we're looking at a particular development and trying to decide whether or not what's their obligation, we have to go back and look at the conditions of approval and what was approved and required for that development. And was a homeowners association, required to finance and do that, which is usually the case because you can't do it against 70 people, individual lots. But we'd have to go back and look at those documents for the approval, and then through code enforcement, go after them to maintain their responsibilities. Hopefully they do it voluntarily, which is usually the case. We have that situation, but that's the mechanism.
It's like a retention bond. If they don't take care of it, the city has to go and take care of it, and then we would just levy against every home.
And so,
Sorry.
Sarah, was that what you were talking about when you said you were doing this review and it wasn't clear that we had that basis to act, and that's what you want to put in place?
Yes, there's no written agreements for these playgrounds that we're discussing. There's nothing that said when they were installed. And it is only 7 locations, to be clear. All the new HOAs, they keep ownership of their own properties. So we won't acquire the land underneath.
It sounds like maybe that's the issue, is we don't have a clear basis to go in and hold their feet to the fire.
Sure, every new association, hopefully we're making sure that they do that, take care of the equipment, and they budget appropriately for that. We just get so many people who come and say, we don't have open space for kids, we don't have room, and then an association gets together and goes, oh, we want to disband the association, which they can't. But they say, let's not pay dues, let's not take care of it adequately. And then we run into this problem where, you know, their liability is huge for whether it's for the association or whatever. And I'm just hoping that in the future, we can make sure that.
Sarah, quick question. Those 3 properties, little parks that you have on the list that you're considering do not replacing, those are city-owned properties, correct?
Correct.
So is there a thought process to limit the city's liability and just deed those properties back to the HOA or something? Because otherwise we got to go in and maintain them once a year or something, right?
That is something that we can certainly look into, is which properties are able to be reverted outside of city ownership. I do know that a couple of them have storm detention areas on them. So those currently are maintained by the city. And then flash forward to today, when you build a new HOA, the HOA usually retains their own storm detention and are taking care of it. So we're just talking about a snapshot in time where things were very different. But it's certainly something I can look through each of these properties and report back with which ones do the city have to keep as owned by the city versus are any eligible to give back to the HOAs.
Okay, great. The second question I have, your little map there of kind of, I guess, the, what would you call it, northwest area of the city, the Bayview Trail, is that part of the consideration for a park area?
As part of the Bayview Trail, Marysville is going to be building a new trailhead just north of us.
Right.
And so we were letting them take the lead on that new type of area. We haven't proposed a new park off of that specific trail within Lake Stevens, but could be the future. It's not quite joining up with Frontier Heights, but it's close by.
Marysville, though, has indicated in the past that they are looking for a site north of Soper Hill in the Whiskey Ridge area to build a community park that would be in proximity to the Bayview Trail.
Right. I guess my question is a trail considered a park? Kind of a passive park?
Yeah, you're fine. The trail is a trail. It's a type of recreation and it crosses over.
falls In the definition of a park.
Okay.
In the code, yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you.
I have one quick question about Oak Hill Park. You may or may not be able to answer. You had mentioned that you're in conversation with the developers. You don't have public information to share. Are you able to share whether or not those conversations are productive and collaborative?
I think they're getting there. We've had recent discussion with them about our demands, and we've given them what our plan is, that what we're going to do, and in an effort to get them to come into what we think is the required full compliance, and we'll know that very shortly.
Great.
So
Thank you.
it's kind of been dragging on, but we took some action to speed things up, and we should know fairly shortly what
Thank
the outcome of this is going to be.
Thank you. Any further questions for Sarah?
Thank you, Sarah.
Great, thank you.
Thank
Moving
you.
on to discussion item C, graffiti management and abatement. Turn it over to Aaron.
Hey, good evening, Aaron, or actually just to council this time. Good evening. I don't have a presentation for you, but the staff report in the council packet begins to sort of explain how how graffiti can be dealt with in the city. In fact, I'm right now working on the policy itself, but as you know, graffiti is it's a crime that affects both. We sort of put it into two buckets: city-owned assets, non-city-owned assets. Graffiti on city-owned property is the responsibility of the city to abate, right? We remove it and we actively do that. I'm sorry, I'm having some computer trouble. It won't scroll. Let me try that. Okay. The way it works for city-owned property is Public Works is notified using Citizen View, which is There's an app, Citizen View app that you can use. Generally notified by either the PD or code enforcement or the public or our own staff that we have graffiti on a city-owned asset. Once it's confirmed that it is indeed a city-owned asset, a work order is generated, and usually the conditions abated fairly quickly. Usually try to get to those in a few days. If it's obscene, same day, within 24 hours. We really try to get after those things. This is great. If it's a non-city owned asset, WashDOT sound walls, for example, that seems like the one that's creating some trouble. It really requires a notification of the property owner. The city doesn't necessarily have the right to go onto their property and abate a condition. It's on non-city owned property, right? So the way that generally works is the PD generate a, how do you describe it? It's a.
Well, if we're called by 911, we'd respond and take a report. If the property owner is on site, we would notify them. They have, depending on what it is, if it's obscene, we need to remove it immediately. You have 1 day. If it's not offensive, then it goes to a 10-day period that they have to remove it.
Right. And so the way that generally works is PD notifies code enforcement that there's graffiti. If the property owner is not eager to remove it or abate it, it goes into the code enforcement process, and that's with Russ's team. And I didn't include, I wish I had, but there's a code enforcement, there are various levels of code enforcement issues, and they're all dealt with a little bit differently. Russ, did you want to explain it, add to that?
Sure. Thank you, Aaron. Just going over a few of the terms. So when Aaron says abate by his public works, he's using a very limited definition in that they are the responsible parties in doing the cleanup. In the code enforcement realm means abatement is a legal proceeding that the city takes action to do a work on behalf of someone else and charge them. So even with that, there are different levels of abatement. So the standard process for abatement is we would put the responsible party on notice. Hey, you have a violation of the code, and we have a process to go through, including notifying the city council that the city intends to go through this, that we've failed at all of our other attempts for compliance, including education, voluntary correction, notices of violation. So that becomes sort of a last straw enforcement mechanism. There's also an emergency abatement that Aaron did include in the staff report. Emergency abatement is typically reserved for an environmental hazard, something that's dealing with a life safety issue. So it's an immediate response that's needed, and the city would take action accordingly. Graffiti sort of falls in the former category, that we understand the gravity and the importance of it, but it's also not creating a life safety public health issue. So it would follow the code enforcement process, the due process as described in our code.
Russ, can you give me a time frame of what it would take to, let's map out, somebody calls 911, police department, we got obscene, I don't know what your definition of obscene graffiti is, but could be gang related, that could be obscene, we don't know it. But just say a general graffiti, somebody has plastered a fence somewhere, so they call 911. Police reports filed, nothing happens, it's on private property. And it goes through the process. So start to finish, what would be a time frame that takes to actually get, say, a non-cooperative property owner? How long could this go on for?
Well, non-cooperative, you never know. So say everything happens in about an increment of 7 to 14 days where we give this initial notice. In the case of graffiti, it's prescribed in code. They have to deal with it in 10 days. So we would go out there and say, you need to remove the graffiti. If they failed to do that at day 10, we would issue that notice of violation. Then they have 14 days to comply or to appeal and contest your determination. If they contest that, you know, that I can't even give you an answer of how long, because then that gets handed off to the hearing examiner, and how quickly can they take this through a process. What we see in most cases, and Chief, correct me if I'm wrong, that the small graffiti is dealt with really quickly. We're sort of in this new realm with another agency that the wheels are moving very slowly for them. They're in the middle of a construction project. So they're relying on their contractor to do the work. So that has become lost in its own kind of procedure. So we have some other ideas that I will let Aaron sort of talk about specifically with WashDOT on how we would like to come into some sort of a maintenance agreement. But best case, you know, you're looking at, you know, we'll say 48 hours to 10 days. Worst case, that's probably going into probably an 8 or 12-week kind of process for those folks that want to be obstinate and not be cooperative.
Yeah, let me make a comment about graffiti on WashDOT property. It's public property, but it's owned by, you know, it's owned by a state agency. The problem with WashDOT rights of way, and it's not just a problem here, it's a problem in lots of cities where you see things like graffiti just hang around forever on WashDOT property. So WashDOT will tell you, you can't take code enforcement action against us because there are statutes that give us complete control over these parcels of property, including the maintenance. And there's a statute that says that anyone who's doing anything with statutory authority, they can't be guilty of a nuisance activity for the way they carry out their responsibilities. There's no particular case law with respect to graffiti on WashDOT property, but there are other examples of other types of things where different public entities have been unsuccessful in making WashDOT comply with their issues. So dealing with WashDOT on their property, we can't deal with it in the same way that we would deal with, say, it's on your property or my property. Unfortunately, it doesn't work that way. So that's a problem we have with WashDOT, a practical one.
So what are they going to do if we just take care of it?
Well, you know,
mean, there- there
it's
is-
like anything, you know, we can't go on normally, say, on a piece of private property without the owner's permission or some court order or some other authority to be able to do that. Interesting, of course, though, WashDOT right away is public property, right? You're not going to get trespassed for walking on it, but you can be, you can be responsible for a person can be responsible, or an entity like can be responsible for any damage we say we do to any WashDOT property in the process, whether it's us or whether it's a citizen. That could be a problem.
Can we come up with an agreement with them, though? Can't we?
Well,
talk to
maybe
WashDOT?
I think Aaron's gonna talk a little bit more about that. I mean, as I'll just say, as you've seen, say, with the roundabout being constructed, you know, that WashDOT always comes back with, hey, why don't you be responsible for the maintenance? But it's generally more than just washing off graffiti. It has a number of areas of maintenance responsibility that involve maybe considerably more dollars than just cleaning it up. But whether they would be willing to deal with us strictly on a graffiti situation, I don't know. Have Aaron's talked to them about that or not? But anyhow, I just wanted to, that's the problem with WashDOT property.
I think Councilor Dodger, did you have your hand up? Oh, you did. Okay.
I did, but the question was already answered. I'm waiting to hear what Aaron says about a maintenance agreement on graffiti with WashDOT.
Okay, well, I'm interested in finding an alternative solution because the way it's been operating right now has been somewhat difficult with WashDOT and the contractor. Actually, the wall right now is owned by the contractor, ICI, out there. Anyway, I'm going to Public Works is going to bring a maintenance agreement to you in the next meeting or so for maintenance of the landscaping adjacent to the roundabouts because council, we want it to look good, right? We want that space to look good. And so we've quantified the costs associated with maintaining the landscaping. WashDOT was very willing to say, yeah, go ahead. City, knock yourself out, maintain the landscaping adjacent to our right of way or in our right of way. And I think we can make it work. There are certain costs. It's tens of thousands of dollars to maintain the landscaping. It's a lot of landscaping. And I think the same could be said for graffiti on sound walls that are owned by WashDOT. I don't know. I will speak with them, but I don't. I have a feeling it might be treated the same way, where they say, "Knock yourself out, maintain our walls, city. If you want to spray them when they're vandalized, go ahead and do it. Here's the agreement." They're not going to be eager to pay anything for it. So if the council's interested in hearing that proposal, I can go ahead and we'll put that together and take a look at the costs associated with it and bring it back to you.
So Aaron, I'm sorry, quick follow-up question. So are we fairly certain that it's owned by a private contractor at this point? Did I hear that right?
That's true. That's correct.
So I don't want to burn a bridge with WashDOT before it's even built, but does that mean we have a window where we could act against a private party through code enforcement?
Right, I mean, if WashDOT hasn't accepted the improvement, it's
Yeah.
in the control of the contractor. We should give that notice to clean it up to the contractor.
And we did, and they were actually going to spray it today, but I think they were rained out.
Okay.
So it's a tomorrow task, I think.
Sounds
Weather
fair. It
permitting.
was going to rain today.
We also have another idea as far as it relates to the WashDOT walls. We would like to plant some vegetation along the base of those, probably some Nootka rose or some very other nasty, spiky native plants. That would be an extreme disincentive for people to try to get to the walls. So that's going to be another thing that we do propose.
Let me also mention because I was dealing with this today with the chief. Some of you have probably heard that a federal district court in Seattle signed an injunctive order prohibiting the city of Seattle from enforcing its, I'll call it its graffiti ordinance. And it's their ordinance is modeled right after the state statute that we have adopted by reference in our court, in our code, the court finding that the language of the in this case, the municipal code ordinance was unconstitutionally overbroad and vague. And so the question becomes, what do we do, or what we need to do? I've given the police chief some advice about what we might be able to do in the interim, but I'm going to recommend that we amend our code so that, because it's going to be what next year or the year after before the legislature might deal with a statutory change. So we're going to have to adopt a local code amendment where we try to fix what the problems that the federal district court found in Seattle's ordinance. Because as a practical matter, if our department tries to cite anyone under our provision in our code that's the same, they're going to raise that as a defense here. So that's something that we're going to have to deal with fairly quickly. So I'll try to get an ordinance amendment soon. I just got a copy of the Seattle decision today. I also want to get a copy of some of the pleadings because I want to understand all of the arguments that the plaintiffs in that case were making, because the judge refers back to some of their pleadings with all the possibilities of why the thing is overbroad. So I want to be able to do the best job we can to have a bulletproof ordinance. But anyhow, that'll be coming up too.
I just appreciate all your work that you're putting forth on this issue. Graffiti is an issue. If it gets out of hand, it's really bad. So I appreciate your work and attention to it. And I look forward to having some paperwork here, hopefully in the next meeting or two, and get a direction on this. So thank you.
Any other questions? Comments? The last item we have is our draft agenda for next week. Next council meeting on the agenda at this point is a budget amendment to take action on regarding after tonight's presentation. Community Development Department report. Public Works Sunset Beach Park improvements. Public Works ADA Improvement Project Award. Adopting the Housing Action Plan, and 2 resolutions around the TBD Revenue Fund and the Capital Fund.
Is the housing action plan, is that a proposal or is it a public hearing? What is it exactly?
Russ, do you want to speak to that? Or Jean?
Certainly. So the Housing Action Plan is the report we've been working on for the last year with Burke Consultants that analyzes our current comprehensive plan, compares it to changes in state legislation and the growth targets established from the county, and prepares a document that just is more like a report card of how we're doing in producing housing of various types. So it would be like the climate sustainability plan where you would adopt it by resolution. It doesn't require a public hearing at this point. It's just being sort of, you're recognizing that document, and then future implementation pieces would be as part of the 2024 comprehensive plan update.
Okay, great. Is with the recent activity of the legislature with all the changes to the zoning laws and so forth, are we going to have some sort of workshop here in the next month or so that kind of gives us a heads up as to what we could be changing, what we could be expecting coming down the pipe, I guess?
Yeah, I think next week will be a good launching point to do that, at least as it relates to land use code. A lot of that has already been integrated into their draft findings, just making some comparisons to our existing code and what changes we may need to make. One of the other things that I'm waiting for is, if you look at House Bill 1110, which is the missing middle bill, a portion of that is supposed to have the Department of Commerce providing some guidance on what qualifies as an exception. They've not done that yet, and I'll be very interested to see what that looks like, because potentially with the work we've already done, we might be able to show consistency with the intent of the new regulations and not have to do any work. So we'll have an audit of what happened, and then stay tuned as, Commerce releases more information on their part to bring the two together.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Any other questions? All right, meeting adjourned. Thank you.